Did you know that Kabbalah is an essential part of the Torah? Welcome to the Shomer Emunim Kabbalah Explainer series. My name is Avinoam Fraenkel, and this series will introduce you to several key Kabbalistic ideas that are now properly explained in my latest book, Shomer Emunim, The Introduction to Kabbalah, using accessible, modern, scientific ideas. Click on the link in the description below for details about my book. It is recommended that this series is viewed in sequence as it builds up several of these Kabbalistic ideas as it goes along. Let's start by asking what exactly Kabbalah is and who is obligated to study it. Misconceptions abound as to what Kabbalah is. Most confuse it with apocryphal supernatural acts, perhaps the most famous of which is the Golem of Prague, about which there is strong evidence to suggest it was a fabricated story. Some relate to Kabbalah as a form of meditation or prayer, and the truth is that, unknown to most, Jewish prayer cannot be properly understood without Kabbalah. Nevertheless, first and foremost, Kabbalah is simply the deepest level of Torah study. The Torah, the embodiment of Jewish law and practice, was handed over in a divine mass revelation, an event witnessed by the entirety of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And Kabbalah is the deepest understanding of the Torah. Over the ages, however, and even today, Kabbalah has been seriously misrepresented. It has been disconnected from the Torah, distorted and used to sanction practices that have nothing whatsoever to do with the Torah and Judaism. One example relates to the context within which the original book, Shomer Emunim, was written in the early 18th century. There was a group of many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jews called the Sabbateans, who over an extended period were led away from Judaism by the philosophy of the false Messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi, a philosophy that twisted Kabbalistic concepts out of context to license practices totally unacceptable to Torah Judaism. To complicate things, at that time there was also an ongoing debate questioning the historical transmission of the Kabbalah. The mass departure from Judaism through Kabbalistic distortion was the last straw that caused many in the mainstream to sit up and seriously challenge the authenticity of the Kabbalah. This historical backdrop set the stage for Rabbi Yosef Ergas to write his monumental work Shomer Emunim, to, on the one hand, set the record straight by explaining these Kabbalistic concepts in a simple way so that they would no longer be distorted. And on the other hand, it also addressed the issue of Kabbalistic transmission, establishing the Kabbalah as authentic and as the deepest part of the Torah. Are there any restrictions on studying Kabbalah? Most certainly yes. Given that Kabbalah is the deepest part of the Torah, it requires a level of intellectual maturity before engaging with it. A minimum age is often assigned to its study. Some say 20, others 40. However, the specific age is not the key point, but rather the attainment of a level of intellectual maturity. Irrespective of this, historically, Kabbalah was handed down the generations using an encrypted language, and as a result was totally inaccessible, even to the intellectually mature, with the exception of specific individuals who merited a direct person-to-person transmission of the Kabbalah tradition. This method of transmission was necessary as language had not been developed to meaningfully convey its subtle ideas. More than that, because of the lack of language, very physical analogies were used which, if taken literally, would blasphemously frame the divine within physicality. Therefore, transmission was heavily restricted to the gifted few who could access it without any risk of falling into blasphemy. Nowadays, however, with the advancement of science, several of these deep ideas can already be properly understood using contemporary language that can be related to without fear of blasphemy, and these ideas are now genuinely accessible. Notwithstanding this, several famous Kabbalistic rabbis such as the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Rabbi Eliyahu de Vilna Gaon, and Rabbi Shneor Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, all explain that Kabbalah study should be included in one's overall syllabus of Torah study. They prescribe that even an intellectually mature beginner to Torah study should include at least a small amount of Kabbalah study within the overall Torah curriculum. However, as one advances, the proportion should increase, and eventually the lion's share of a person's Torah study should be focused on Kabbalah study. To sum up, Kabbalah is the deepest part of the Torah, and it is now more accessible than it ever was through scientific language. In addition, over time it should have become an increasing proportion of every mature person's Torah curriculum. Before discussing several Kabbalah topics in the context of contemporary science, the next explainer will provide insight into the extent that ancient scientific ideas have influenced the presentation and language of the Kabbalah. Before you go, don't forget, click on the link in the description below for details about Shomer Emunim, the Introduction to Kabbalah, which contains comprehensive explanations and sources for everything in this explainer series. So, thank you for listening, and looking forward to seeing you in explainer number 2.